Hey guys, bienvenidos otra vez a mi canal. Today in this video I want to be looking at the historical context of La Casa de Bernarda Alba. I've seen a lot of stuff online, but not a lot that says how you can link it back into the essay. So today hopefully I'll be explaining how we can look at the context of the play in the context of an essay. So the main points that I'm sure many of us will know about the context is the fact that Lorca is writing this on the eve of Francoist government. So he's writing this as he's travelling around with his theatre group performing, and he never saw this play performed. He was executed by Francoist nationalists, partly for being a homosexual. So a lot of people say the fact that he was a homosexual influences the play, because he seems to have a lot of sympathy for a marginalised group, which is women at the time, and an insight that a lot of other authors at the time didn't have, because he seems to understand the struggle of being repressed. So in an essay you could point out the fact that Lorca seems to understand the struggle of women because he himself was a marginalised group, and he was gay, and in a way that a lot of other authors couldn't at the time. We can also see from his book of poems called Romancero Gitano. So that's a book of poems about the gypsy lifestyle and the struggles that they face with authorities and integrating into Spanish culture. They live on the margins of society, and his book explores the theme of racism that gypsies were facing. So that he's obviously he's got some very left-wing ideas, some very liberal ideas, which is obviously why he was targeted by Franco, aside from the fact he was homosexual. So you can say that he has this real empathy as a writer. He gives La Poncia a really big role in the play. Everyone knows that La Poncia is my favourite character. I love La Poncia. You have La Poncia's rants, which are like 30 años lavando sus sábanas, so 30 years washing her sheets, these rants show it kind of gives a voice to women at the time whose voices wouldn't have been expressed. So Lorca is given the opportunity for the women that he grew up with. So he grew up with these kind of these type of women and this type of situation in Andalusia where he grew up. He grew up with these type of women, so he's giving them a voice in a time. He gives La Poncia's opinion, shows her good sides as well as her bad sides. She's a servant woman, so she's lower than La Criada is lower than La Poncia, but of all the main characters, she's the lowest in rank. But he gives her a big voice. She's a funny character. She gives advice. She's wise, sabia, in Spanish. And so through his understanding of what it's like to be marginalised, he uplifts the voices of those who are poor, women, and in other works of an ethnic minority in Spain. So you can really see his socialist ideals. That's another point, that he's a socialist, coming through his works. Another point I was thinking of, I don't know how relevant, it's just kind of an aside, I don't know how relevant it would be to people, but Lorca wrote this play as one of 3 plays about kind of the area he grew up in, Andalusia, and the others are Yerma and Bodas de Sangre. They take place in the area that he grew up, and this is significant because it means that we can really get an impression of how he feels about these areas. This is significant because we can see the play laced with his own impression of where he grew up, like the heat that everyone describes as insufferable, which we know is obviously a metaphor for like the oppression of Bernarda and also like the lack of freedom that the women living in the house have. This suggests that Lorca himself, with his memories of living in Andalusia, found the heat oppressive himself. So that tells you something about Lorca, and also about what Andalusia means to Lorca. That's significant because sometimes in plays, like really famous plays, so for example Shakespeare, there's no evidence that Shakespeare ever went to Italy, yet loads of his plays were set in Italy. So how much he knows about Italy is always under question, but we know that Lorca has extensive experience of living in Andalusia because that's where he grew up. So therefore the setting is likely to be really accurate if that ever came up as a question. I doubt how accurate is the setting would ever come up as a question, but if you ever needed to mention as kind of a side point, like the heat, you could talk about the heat and the kind of ruralness of the setting and the town dynamic, because obviously those things are going to be representative of how Lorca felt growing up. So somebody commented about what's the link between Franco and the play. So this play wouldn't necessarily be influenced by Franco himself, because Lorca was killed in August of 1936 and the war broke out in July, I believe, of 1936. So the presence of Franco, I mean, if you think I'm wrong, of course comment down below, but I believe, and this is what I would be writing, that the presence of Franco isn't necessarily a huge influence on the book, because he wouldn't necessarily have been at the front of Lorca's mind when he was the one who authorised the death of Lorca. I would basically say that the most important thing to mention, if you want to mention context, is who Lorca was, what he stood for. So he was obviously gay and a socialist, a playwright, a free thinker, he through writing these plays about Andalusian life, and especially La Casa de Bernarda Alba, he is condemning Bernarda. Bernarda is obviously a ridiculous, like monstrous figure, and so that suggests that, well, one question that I've seen and I've done as a practice is Bernarda a monster or simply the product of her time? And either way, whether you think Bernarda is a monster or a product of her time, I can do a video covering how I would answer that question, or what I think of it if people want. If Bernarda is a monster or a product of her time, either way it tells us a lot about Lorca's perception of his time and location and the kind of people that lived in his time and location, because if Bernarda's a monster, then that shows the qualities that Lorca finds to be monstrous. So that would be like repressiveness, hyper-traditionality, like being hyper-traditional, ultra-conservative, those things. Obviously Lorca finds repulsive through the way he's written La Casa de Bernarda Alba. Or if she's a product of her time, that shows that Lorca is commentating on his society. So either way, it's important to remember, for a question like that, it's important to remember who Lorca was as a person. He was a very left-wing person at a time when right-wing nationalism, Francoists, were rising to power. So he represents the resistance, and in a way the characters such as the daughter, or basically the characters that aren't Bernarda are pretty much the resistance to Bernarda, but she has power because her position is accepted in society. No one's going to challenge her to a large extent, not because, I'm sure if they all teamed up they could overcome her physically. There's like 6, 7 of them, all the characters that live in the house, there's lots of them. They could definitely overpower her physically, even though she's got her baston, her walking stick. But she's a symbol of like social sensibility, of like almost how we British people would think of like Victorians. She has this kind of idea, but like the Spanish equivalent. I mean, people might not agree with me there, but I always think of her as like really like defending the morality in the way that we perceive Victorians as doing, so in Britain. So I think they could take her down physically, but that kind of what she represents could not be taken down by those 7 women living in the house. How many are there? 5 daughters, La Poncia, La Criada and Maria Josefa. So if they all teamed up, I'm sure they could take her on, but they couldn't take down what she represents and that society. If they killed her or overpowered her, locked her up, they would be looked down upon by society. She represents a wider problem in society, as well as being an individual monster. So that shows you how Lorca views the society of the time as oppressive, especially in rural regions. The video has been short today, and there is obviously a lot to say about context. Let me know if I've missed anything. I can do a part 2. I'm in the middle of my exams. This is a way of revising for me for my Spanish exam. On La Casa Bernarda ALBA and El Laberinto del Fauno, if anyone wants me to make a quick video on El Laberinto del Fauno. Obviously I'm not a teacher, I'm no authority on either the book or the film, but this is kind of my way of revising, giving a bit of what, you know, sharing a bit of what I've revised basically. So if anyone wants any other tips or videos or whatever, let me know in the comments. I'll do my best to make a video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing. Thanks.